Welcome to this deep dive. I want you to just take a moment and look around wherever you are right now.
Yeah, whether you're at your desk grabbing a quick lunch or, out for a walk with your headphones in.
Right, or maybe you're pushing a cart down the brightly lit aisles of your local grocery store, stocking up the pantry.
Just really look closely at the food in front of you.
Exactly. Look at those brightly colored boxes, the crinkling plastic wrappers, the perfectly uniform shapes. Because the choices you think you're making right now, well, the autonomy you believe you have over what fuels your body, it might not actually be yours.
It is a profoundly unsettling realization when you first confront it. I mean, it really shakes the foundation of how we view our daily lives.
It really does. We all just operate under this implicit assumption of individual agency, right?
Yeah. We believe that if we read the label or, check the calories or try to balance our meals, we're in the driver's seat.
Especially with something as intimate as eating.
Exactly. But the sheer volume of evidence we're looking at today suggests that within the modern food environment, agency is largely an illusion, a very carefully constructed, highly profitable illusion.
And tearing down that illusion is our mission for today. We're going to map out the invisible architecture of the modern diet.
And we should be clear, this isn't just a casual chat about nutrition.
Right. We are not here to debate keto versus paleo or talk about counting macros or shame anyone for hitting a drive-through.
No, this is an investigation into how our food and the actual packaging it comes in functions as an engineered delivery system.
A system designed from the microscopic level up to completely bypass your biological defenses.
Yeah, to override your natural satiety signals and basically generate unprecedented corporate profit at the direct expense of your long-term health.
The scope of what we're covering today is just massive. So let me give you the lay of the land, the stack of sources we're drawing from for this deep dive.
Because we are definitely bringing the receipts today.
We really are. First, we're looking at massive epidemiological reviews. I mean, historically massive.
Like the 2024 BMJ Umbrella Review.
Right, and the brand new 2025 Lancet series. Then we cross that population health data with hard biomonitoring data out of the University of North Carolina.
Which is fascinating stuff. We're also layering in financial analyses of the global food sector to literally follow the money.
And finally, we're looking at reports on the institutional design of our regulatory agencies, specifically drawing from the 2025 MAHA report.
When you put all of these documents on the table, a singular narrative emerges.
The modern plate is no longer built from ingredients. It's constructed from extracted compounds and chemical wrappers.
Yeah, it's an industrial ecosystem where human biology has become the variable that absorbs the cost of industrial efficiency.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right at the end of the supply chain. The food sitting right in front of you and the behavioral loops it triggers.
To understand this, we really have to talk about how we classify what we're eating.
Right, because for decades, we've just thought about food in terms of proteins, fats, and carbs.
But our sources point to a totally different framework, which is the Novier classification system.
And that system is a total paradigm shift.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus away from isolated nutrients. It argues that a carbohydrate in a whole apple behaves entirely differently in your body than a chemically identical carb that's been extracted, bleached, and injected into a toaster pastry.
So it categorizes food based on the actual industrial processing.
Exactly. The extent and the purpose of the processing. And it places ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, at the extreme end of that intervention.
Let me push back here for a second, because people always get tripped up on this.
Sure, what's the hang-up?
Humans have been processing food for thousands of years, right? We mill wheat, we salt cure meats, we ferment dairy into cheese.
Right, of course.
So aren't we just talking about the next logical evolution of food preservation? What is the actual difference between a stone mill making bread and a massive factory producing a shrink-wrapped loaf?
That is the perfect question. The distinction is everything. Traditional processing is designed to make whole foods edible or to preserve them.
Okay.
The original food matrix remains mostly intact. But ultra-processed foods are not derived from whole foods in any recognizable physical way. They are assembled.
Assembled?
Yes, through a process called fractionation.
Okay, explain fractionation to me like I'm standing on the factory floor. What am I actually looking at?
Imagine a kernel of corn arriving at a plant. In traditional processing, you grind that whole kernel into cornmeal. You still have the fiber, the germ, the endosperm.
Right, it's all still corn.
Exactly. But in fractionation, they chemically and mechanically tear that kernel apart at a microscopic level.
Oh, wow.
They isolate just the starch, stripping away all the fiber and nutrients. Then they take that isolated starch, which is now just a cheap, raw chemical substrate, and run it through an extruder under extreme heat and pressure.
That does not sound like cooking.
It's not. Then they mix it with isolated seed oils, synthetic emulsifiers to bind it together, artificial coloring to make it look appetizing, and artificial flavoring to make it taste like something it's not.
So it's kind of like the culinary equivalent of taking apart a house, throwing away the wood, the glass, and the wiring, keeping just the drywall dust, mixing it with glue, building a shiny new box, and calling it a house.
That is exactly it. It mimics food, but structurally, it's an entirely novel substance to human evolutionary biology.
And the staggering reality is that these formulations now make up roughly 60 to 70% of daily caloric intake in the United States.
60 to 70%. It's astonishing.
I really want that to sink in for everyone listening. For the vast majority of people, this isn't just a treat.
No, it's not just grabbing a candy bar at the movies.
This highly engineered, fractionated food forms the absolute baseline of daily consumption. It's the rule, not the exception.
And the health data on this is just terrifying. Look at the 2024 BMJ Umbrella Review.
Yeah, that study is a behemoth. For those who don't know, an umbrella review isn't just a single experiment. It's a review of other reviews.
Right, this one encompasses 45 pooled meta-analyses. We are talking about 9.8 million participants.
You really don't get sample sizes much bigger than that in public health.
You don't. With smaller studies of a few thousand people, you always worry about confounding variables, like maybe the people who eat a lot of UPFs also happen to smoke more or exercise less.
Statistical noise, basically.
Exactly. But when you have a sample size of nearly 10 million people across diverse populations, that noise gets completely filtered out.
The true underlying signal becomes undeniable.
And the signal here is a blaring siren. Ultra-processed food intake is causally linked to 32 distinct adverse health outcomes.
The numbers in the BMJ review are incredibly specific. They mention cardiovascular mortality shows a 1.50 relative risk. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. Relative risk compares the probability of an event occurring in an exposed group versus a non-exposed group.
Okay, so 1.0 means no difference.
Right. So a 1.50 relative risk means individuals consuming the highest amounts of UPFs have a 50% increased probability of dying from heart-related issues compared to those consuming the least.
A 50% jump in mortality risk. That is massive.
It's a huge jump tied directly to the dietary share of these engineered products.
And then there's type 2 diabetes. The study notes a dose-response relationship. It increases your risk by 1.12 or 12% for every single incremental exposure.
Yeah, and dose response is the gold standard for proving something is actively causing harm rather than just being associated with it.
Because it means the more the substance you consume, the higher the dose, right?
Exactly. The higher the dose, the more severe the response. For every additional 10% of your daily calories that come from ultra-processed foods, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes goes up by 12%.
It's literally a linear escalator to chronic illness.
It is. It proves the toxicity isn't a fluke.
But here is the multi-trillion-dollar question. If these foods are literally giving us diabetes and causing our hearts to fail at a 50% higher rate, why do we keep eating them?
Right. Why don't we just stop?
Exactly. And this is where the outline gets into hyperpalatability, which absolutely blew my mind.
This is where we shift from food chemistry into behavioral psychology. The overconsumption of these foods is not an accident.
It's a feature, not a bug.
It is the primary design feature. These products are mathematically formulated for hyperpalatability. Engineers identify specific unnatural combinations of salt, sugar, fat, and artificial flavor enhancers.
Combinations that just do not exist anywhere in nature.
Precisely. In nature, you might find something sweet, like fruit, but it doesn't have fat.
Right.
Or you find a fatty nut, but it isn't inherently sweet.
Right. And our brains evolved to seek out scarce calories.
Yes, so when we find sugar or fat in nature, our brain gives us a dopamine hit. But natural whole foods contain fiber and water.
So our stomach eventually stretches.
Right, and your gut releases hormones like leptin and peptide YY, which travel to the brain and say, okay, we have enough energy, you can stop eating now.
That's the natural satiety signal. But the food engineers know exactly how to hack that signal.
They absolutely do.
You know, when I read this part of the research, I didn't think of food at all. I thought of my smartphone.
Ah, that's an interesting comparison. How so?
Well, it's like playing a slot machine where the casino completely controls the dopamine drip. Think about reading a physical book. There's a natural stopping point.
Hmm.
A chapter ends, and your brain has a second to pause.
Right. You decide if you want to keep going.
But social media apps use infinite scrolling. They remove the stopping point, so you just keep swiping without thinking.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
These food engineers have done the exact same thing to our digestive system. By perfectly calibrating the salt, sugar, and fat, and stripping away all the fiber, the food literally melts in your mouth before it hits your stomach.
It completely overrides your biological "I'm full" signal.
You aren't lacking willpower. The close app button in your brain has been intentionally disabled by a lab tech.
In the industry, they actually have a term for this optimal calibration. They call it the bliss point.
The bliss point. That sounds so clinical.
It is. They run thousands of trials to find the exact ratio of crunch, salt, and fat that maximizes pleasure without ever triggering fullness. I call this entire mechanism the perception engine.
And the whole system is marketed to us purely as convenience.
Think about how convenience is sold to us. It's always framed as liberation. Freedom from the kitchen, no prep time, endless options for a busy lifestyle.
You deserve a break today. Grab a quick bite.
Exactly. But underneath that shiny marketing veneer, it's a sophisticated behavioral control system. The consumption becomes entirely divorced from biological hunger
It basically becomes a chemical compulsion.
because the choice exists only within predefined boundaries.
Right, when the entire environment, the grocery aisle, the vending machine, is saturated with food engineered to override your signals, your individual agency is completely compromised.
You're no longer making a rational choice about fueling your body. You're interacting with a system designed to extract repeated consumption from you.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We've established the food itself is engineered to force a behavioral loop. But our sources show the food is only half the delivery system,
Yeah, the other half is what physically surrounds the food.
the packaging,
Hmm.
which introduces a physical chemical loop to accompany the behavioral one.
The engineering of the modern diet extends right into the containment. We have to talk about the physical wrappers, and to do that, we have to look at PFAS.
Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, widely known as forever chemicals.
Yes.
Now, forever is a strong word. What exactly makes them forever chemicals?
It comes down to their molecular structure. PFAS are characterized by a chain of carbon and fluorine atoms.
And that's a strong bond.
The carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest chemical bonds in all of organic chemistry. It requires immense, unnatural energy to break it.
The nature can't just handle it.
No, in the natural environment, there are no bacteria, no weather patterns, no natural biological processes that can efficiently degrade that bond. Once created in a lab, it is effectively permanent on a human timescale.
That is terrifying. And where are we finding these indestructible chemicals?
They are heavily used in the food packaging industry. They're applied as coatings to grease-resistant wrappers.
Like the paper wrapping around a fast food burger.
Exactly. Microwave popcorn bags, pizza boxes, even those seemingly eco-friendly sealed disposable cardboard containers.
And their stated purpose is just containment, right? Keeping the hot oil from ruining your clothes.
Purely functional containment.
But they don't stay in the paper, do they? I'm looking at the 2025 analysis from the University of North Carolina using biomonitoring data from NAGs.
Right, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey.
For our listeners, NAGs is a massive program that actually takes blood and urine samples from the population to see what's physically inside us. What did UNC find when they crossed the dietary data with the blood samples?
They found a direct, measurable, and deeply concerning correlation. Individuals with a higher intake of ultra-processed foods had significantly elevated blood concentrations of two very specific PFAS compounds.
PFHAS and MIFOSA.
Yes, highly persistent compounds.
Okay, wait. Let's pause and walk through the mechanics of this. I want to make sure I understand how a chemical applied to a piece of cardboard ends up in my bloodstream.
It's a critical juncture in the data.
Do I have to accidentally eat a piece of the wrapper? Does the paper melt?
No, you don't have to eat the paper. It comes down to basic physical chemistry. These chemicals aren't ingredients. They're not intentionally part of the food formulation. They migrate.
They migrate from the packaging into the food.
Exactly. And that migration happens primarily at the interface of two things, heat and lipid contact.
Heat and lipid contact, so hot grease.
Yes. When a hot, greasy product touches a wrapper treated with PFAS, the heat increases the kinetic energy of the molecules.
Okay.
The lipids, the fats in the food, act as a solvent. The chemical barrier on the paper is literally soluble in the hot fat. Oh my God.
At the microscopic level, the barrier effectively dissolves. The chemical leaches out of the wrapper and infuses directly into the food you're about to eat.
Let me push back on this because this feels like a trap.
Oh, yeah.
Let's say I'm trying to do the right thing. I know the dangers of the ultra-processed burger. I understand the bliss point. So I say no thanks and I drive past the drive-thru.
Good choice.
Instead, I go to a trendy, fast casual place and I order a seemingly healthy, minimally processed hot grain bowl with fresh veggies and grilled chicken.
Okay, sounds great.
But it comes in one of those brown, compostable, grease-resistant cardboard bowls. And the food is hot. Am I still actively ingesting the wrapper?
Yes, absolutely. And this is the most insidious part of the system.
Seriously, even with the healthy food.
Yes, the chemical layer operates entirely independently of the nutritional profile of the food inside it. The PFAS doesn't care if it's migrating into a processed chicken nugget or organic farm-fresh chicken.
That is infuriating. If the packaging contains PFAS, and there is heat and lipid contact, migration occurs. The moment you take a bite, consumption completes the pathway.
And the FDA's own 2025 testing confirmed this systemic contamination, right? They didn't just find it in fast food wrappers.
That's right. The FDA testing found TFAS residues migrating across the broader food system. We're talking detectable levels in shrimp, chicken, milk, and even leafy greens like kale.
So the contamination isn't an isolated incident, it's systemic.
Entirely systemic.
So we've got the behavioral loop forcing us to eat the food, and the physical loop of the wrapper leaching into whatever we eat. Let's talk about the biological impact once these chemicals are inside the human body.
It's not a pretty picture.
Because if they don't break down in nature, I assume they don't break down in my liver either.
They absolutely do not. Once inside your body, these compounds persist. They're characterized by incredibly long biological half-lives.
And a half-life is the time it takes for your body to naturally excrete half of the substance, right?
Exactly. For many PFAS compounds, that half-life is measured in years. If you ingest PFH excess today, it might take 5 to 8 years for your body to clear just half of it.
So every single time you eat from one of these containers, you aren't just adding a tiny bit that gets washed out the next day.
No, you are actively stacking the chemical on top of whatever you ate last week, last month, and last year. Your body cannot easily clear them, so each meal adds to a cumulative toxic load.
And the epidemiological associations with this load are stark. The research links PFAS exposure to severe immune suppression.
It basically blunts your body's ability to fight off infections or respond to vaccines.
It also causes severe thyroid disruption. How does it do that?
The chemical structure of some PFAS is remarkably similar to the fatty acids in our own bodies. They can mimic or block natural hormones.
Wow.
They bind to the proteins in your blood that carry thyroid hormones, essentially knocking the real hormones out of the way. This throws your entire metabolic regulation into chaos.
And beyond the thyroid, we see significant liver and kidney impairment.
Because those are the organs desperately trying and failing to filter these toxins out.
And finally, there's the carcinogenic potential.
Yes, certain PFAS have been explicitly classified by the World Health Organization's IRRC as possible or probable carcinogens.
It's like throwing a handful of microscopic titanium wrenches into the delicate gears of a grandfather clock. The gears just keep grinding against something that won't break down until the gears themselves shatter.
That's a great analogy. The wrapper essentially extends straight into your bloodstream and it stays there. It is an invisible passenger.
So the behavioral design ensures you keep coming back, and the chemical persistence ensures each repetition leaves a toxic trace that doesn't dissipate.
Together, they form a perfectly closed, devastatingly effective loop.
Okay, if this two-tiered system is so comprehensively destructive, if it's literally poisoning us on a cellular level, the screaming question is, why does it persist?
To answer that, we have to follow the money.
We have to look at the financial architecture that absolutely demands this decay. The numbers in our sources are mind-bending. Let's look at the timeline between 1962 and 2021.
Over that 60-year period, UPF manufacturers captured more than half of the $2.9 trillion distributed in shareholder payouts across the entire food sector.
Over half. More than $1.4 trillion flowed directly to the companies manufacturing these fractionated, chemically wrapped products.
And that immense concentration of wealth is not a coincidence. It's a direct reflection of a deliberate industry shift away from raw commodities toward high-margin, shelf-stable products.
Because raw crops have terrible margins, right?
Right. If you're dealing in raw corn or wheat, your profit margins are incredibly thin. You're at the mercy of weather, pests, spoilage, commodity prices.
So the industry realized they needed to change the model. Raw crops are no longer food to be eaten.
They are viewed as substrates.
Substrates, like base raw materials for a factory, like petroleum being turned into plastic.
Precisely. Through refinement, fractionation, and additive layering, these cheap substrates are reassembled into hyper-profitable consumables
Which drastically extends their shelf life.
and aggressively reduces production costs, elevating profitability to astronomical levels.
Because let's look at this from a boardroom perspective. Fresh produce is a logistical nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. Fresh spinach wilts. It requires continuous refrigeration.
If a truck breaks down on the highway, you lose your entire shipment to rot. But a shrink-wrapped box of synthetic cheese crackers,
That will survive an apocalypse.
it can sit in a warehouse in Nevada for 2 years and taste exactly the same. The profit margin is practically guaranteed.
Minimally processed foods operate within very fragile returns because they're perishable. Ultra-processed products achieve total physical stability. This allows for profit margins that are generally 2 to 3 times higher.
2 to 3 times higher. So it's a grim accounting trick. It's like treating the human body as a cheap storage unit for corporate byproducts.
That's an interesting way to phrase it.
The corporation takes the cheapest raw materials, pumps them full of chemicals to make them last forever, and engineers the taste so we can't stop eating them. The company keeps the unprecedented margins, but our biology is forced to pay the long-term storage fees.
Right, in the form of insulin resistance, heart disease, and forever chemicals in our blood. If you connect this to the macroeconomic picture, you realize this health crisis isn't a contradiction.
It's not a bug in the system.
No, it's perfect systemic coherence. A financial system optimized for maximum shareholder returns demands a product that maximizes consumption, minimizes cost, and never rots on a shelf.
And ultra-processed foods satisfy all 3 of those conditions flawlessly.
The product is working exactly as intended.
And the externalized cost of that financial coherence is laid bare in the 2025 Lancet series. They reviewed 104 independent studies on UPF consumption.
And out of those 104 studies, an overwhelming 92 showed a direct increased risk of chronic disease.
They calculated the hazard ratios for all-cause mortality and found it increasing by 1.15 for every 10% rise in the dietary share of UPFs. Can you explain what a hazard ratio of 1.15 actually means for the average person?
Sure. A hazard ratio compares the rate at which adverse events happen in different groups over time. A ratio of 1.15 means there is a 15% higher rate of death from all causes, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, for every single 10% increase in UPFs in someone's diet.
So if you go from eating 20% UPFs to 50% UPS, which is still below the national average, by the way, you are massively accelerating your trajectory toward premature mortality.
And the chilling part is the corporations don't have to care. Declining human health does not disrupt this business model.
In fact, it actually sustains it.
Because the consumption remains the relentless, biologically hacked revenue driver. Human biology just becomes the disposable variable that absorbs the difference between the impossibly cheap production cost and the incredibly high retail profit.
So what does this all mean for the people actually living on the ground? We've seen the macro-level profit margins, the trillions of dollars flowing to Wall Street. But who pays the most immediate, inescapable price for this system?
Because it's obviously not the shareholders eating the stuff at their country clubs.
Right. To see the real cost, we need to turn our focus to the logistics network, the working-class people who physically transport these goods across the country to keep the economy running.
This is where the abstract financial numbers become intensely, tragically physical. We have to look closely at the environment of the long-haul truck drivers, warehouse crews, and night shift workers.
I want everyone listening to picture the scene. It's 2 a.m. You're in the middle of nowhere on an interstate.
The fluorescent lights of a massive highway truck stop are buzzing. You smell diesel fuel in the air.
If you're driving a 12-hour route or unloading pallets on a graveyard shift, that truck stop or gas station defines your entire nutritional perimeter.
And that perimeter is a highly controlled environment. It does not offer genuine options. It only offers availability.
For these workers, time is incredibly compressed. They have strict delivery windows.
Access to varied grocery stores is drastically narrowed by their routes. So the available calories are entirely pre-selected by the very supply chain they're working for.
Fresh alternatives are either severely limited, wildly inconsistent, or completely absent.
The system simply supplies the locations with what it can move efficiently and profitably.
Which brings us back to shelf stability. You know, people constantly talk about personal responsibility when it comes to diet.
Oh, all the time.
We act like having a poor diet is a moral failing, a lack of education or willpower. Just eat a salad, they say.
But if you're a long-haul trucker keeping the global supply chain running in the middle of the night, there is no singular moment of choice. The concept of choice implies equal access to varied outcomes.
Exactly. You can't choose a fresh, nutrient-dense salad if the only establishment open within 50 miles is a gas station selling shrink-wrapped honey buns and heavily salted corn chips sitting under a heat lamp.
Even if there is a tiny refrigerated section, what's in it? Maybe a single bruised apple selling for 3 times the price of the 1,000-calorie fractionated pastry.
There is no genuine choice. There is only a sequence of severely constrained options dictated purely by time, geography, and corporate logistics.
And this raises a profound question about the inherently extractive nature of our logistics network. The epidemiological data aligns perfectly with the reality of that constrained environment.
Yeah, the 2024 and 2025 meta-analyses strictly link higher UPF intake to massively increased rates of obesity, metabolic syndrome, and notably clinical depression.
And these are the exact chronic conditions that disproportionately affect logistics and night shift workers. Because their exposure isn't just a once-in-a-while treat.
The exposure is continuous.
It is their baseline survival fuel. They are eating these wrapped, hyper-palatable meals sitting in parked cabs or break rooms.
That transfer of empty calories, combined with the persistent PFAS chemicals migrating from the wrappers, is happening directly to the worker multiple times every single shift.
It's like running a high-performance engine on crude, unrefined oil because it's cheap and available today, fully knowing you're destroying the internal cylinders and you're going to have to scrap the whole engine next year.
It's a brutal irony. The economic system extracts movement, time, and physical labor from the worker to keep the supply chain functioning.
And simultaneously fuels them with the exact chemical products that guarantee the breakdown of their bodies.
The physiological cost of running the corporate machine simply accumulates within the human being keeping it running.
Fuel the body quickly, return to the road, repeat until the body inevitably breaks. And when the body breaks, the worker is replaced, but the loop continues uninterrupted.
It is absolutely devastating when you frame it like that. We have 9.8 million people in the BMJ review showing 32 adverse health outcomes.
We have the Lancet data screaming about a 15% increase in all-cause mortality.
We have explicit FDA testing proving that these toxic forever chemicals are leaching into our milk and our vegetables. The obvious, glaring, table-pounding question is, where are the regulators?
It's the logical next question.
Why haven't the federal agencies, the FDA, the USDA, the people whose entire job is to protect public health, why haven't they stepped in to stop this?
To understand the profound lack of intervention, we have to look past the surface-level press releases and examine the institutional design of the regulatory agencies themselves.
Okay, let's look at the structure.
In government, institutional design determines regulatory outcome. The agencies operate exactly as they are structured to operate.
If you read the FDA's Human Foods Program documents or the USDA's strategic priorities for 2026, they sound like they're working hard. They emphasize buzzwords like modernization, continuous monitoring, and stakeholder engagement.
They issue massive requests for information to refine chemical definitions. It sounds like a flurry of protective action.
It is designed to sound like action, but these actions operate within a procedural framework that has remained stubbornly stable despite decades of accumulating evidence of harm.
And the 2025 MAHA report reveals exactly why that framework never changes.
The MAHA report documents staggering, almost unbelievable corporate influence across nutrition research, policymaking, and dietary guideline formation. Give me the numbers from the report, because this blew me away.
When investigators conducted a historical analysis of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committees, the very boards that dictate what Americans are officially told to eat, which dictate school lunches and military mess halls, they found that approximately 95% of the committee members have held documented financial ties to the food or pharmaceutical industries.
95%. I want to stop and process that. 95% of the scientists writing the guidelines on what constitutes a healthy diet are financially tied to the massive conglomerates manufacturing the ultra-processed foods.
Or the pharmaceutical companies selling the diabetes drugs to treat the effects of those foods.
But how does that actually work in practice? Are we talking about executives handing over briefcases full of cash and dimly lit parking garages?
No, it is far more sophisticated and mundane than that. The structure of regulatory capture here isn't hidden in some back room. It is completely legally procedural.
procedural capture.
Right. Lobbying expenditures ensure that industry groups maintain a constant, overwhelming presence in policy discussions. They fund the universities where the researchers work. They provide the grants for the specific nutritional studies.
So they don't necessarily buy the answer, but they buy the right to ask the question.
Exactly. They shape the parameters of the research. They dictate what evidence is considered acceptable and what is considered inconclusive.
So if a study shows UPFs are dangerous, the industry-funded committee members don't say the study is fake.
They just say, well, we need more data before we make a drastic policy change. They weaponize scientific caution to delay regulatory action indefinitely.
And this exact same procedural capture extends to the regulation of packaging chemicals, right?
Yeah.
Our sources note that the specific chemical inventories of what companies use in their wrappers remain partially confidential under the guise of trade secrets.
That is correct.
And enforceable exposure limits for PFAS and food actual legal limits that would force a company to pull a product off the shelf are simply not established.
Despite the FDA actively detecting these chemicals in the food supply, there is no hard legal threshold that triggers a mandatory recall or a ban on the packaging.
Wait, so let me get this straight. When the FDA conducts a study and detects toxic, cancer-linked forever chemicals in our milk and our kale, their response is literally just to publish a spreadsheet on their website.
Basically, yes.
Imagine calling the fire department because your kitchen is engulfed in flames. The firemen show up, they walk into the kitchen, they take the temperature of the flames, write it down on a clipboard, publish the temperature on a government website, and then get back in the truck and drive away.
It's absurd, but it's an accurate analogy.
Is it possible that the regulatory agencies aren't actually failing to regulate, but are actually regulating perfectly to protect the industry instead of the citizen?
That is precisely what the institutional architecture suggests. Regulation in this configuration does not function as a barrier to harm. It operates as a stabilizing mechanism for the industry.
Federal agencies detect the contamination, publish the findings in dense academic reports, and ask Congress for more funding to expand their monitoring programs.
But they don't actually stop the contamination from happening. Monitoring replaces intervention.
By constantly gathering data, holding symposiums, and communicating these efforts to the public as protective oversight, the agencies create the comforting appearance of movement.
This data collection sustains their institutional credibility. The public feels that someone is watching the problem, but the underlying profitable conditions, the chemical packaging, the hyperpalatable formulations, remain entirely untouched.
The agencies manage the public perception of the crisis without ever disrupting industrial continuity and quarterly profits. It is a brilliant, terrifying shield.
It's the ultimate triumph of procedural paralysis.
The system persists not because the biological risks are unknown. The 9.8 million people in the BMJ study prove the risks are known perfectly. The system persists because the architecture of the regulation is designed to absorb the public outrage without ever requiring structural change.
The FDA and USDA meticulously document our declining health and our increasing chemical exposure, but they structurally refuse to wield the authority to halt the profit mechanisms driving it.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and it all points to a really stark, uncomfortable reality.
It does.
The convenience of the modern food system, the brightly colored packages, the instant gratification of the drive-through, the endless shelf life in the pantry, it's all an illusion. It is a carefully engineered illusion, masking a tightly closed, immensely profitable loop.
A loop that operates on multiple reinforcing levels of control. Behavioral design relies on mathematical bliss points to force the overconsumption of cheap substrates.
While chemical wrappers physically alter your bloodstream, persistently introducing compounds that your body cannot naturally clear.
And while our biology struggles under that dual assault, shareholder payouts soar into the multi-trillions.
And the regulatory bodies that are theoretically supposed to protect us act as procedural shields for the industry, managing the optics rather than advocating for the consumer.
When you look at the entirety of the data, the conclusion is unavoidable. The modern diet is a triumph of industrial engineering, but it is an engineering that is fundamentally inherently hostile to human biology.
Which leaves us with a final, incredibly unsettling question to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. We know these persistent forever chemicals have half-lives lasting decades, building up in our organs.
We know our biology is actively absorbing the massive health impacts of these synthetic foods, just so the corporate supply chain never has to slow down.
So at what point do human beings cease to be functioning citizens and merely become the unauthorized, unpaid waste management facilities for the industrial food complex?
It is a heavy question, but it's one that requires us to look at our plates, our grocery aisles, and our regulatory systems in a fundamentally different way.
Think about that next time you're standing in the fluorescent light of the grocery aisle, reaching for a brightly wrapped box. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.